We'll go ahead and get started as everyone trickles in because we do have a lot to get through today. If you need reminding of where you are about to go down the sexual orientations and gender identities journey with me. Um, and I really appreciate and I'll go over it in a second, but I am Austin based and have been in Austin, mostly in domestic violence work and in the latter half of my career, homelessness work. But to see some faces and names that I recognize is really fun. So, what I like to do first, particularly around these topics, is give context for who I am and why I am speaking to you. So, I'm Samantha Foss. I use they, them, theirs pronouns. I'm non binary, genderqueer, um, which we'll define later in this presentation. But essentially, it means that I don't use she, her, hers pronouns, though I am femme presenting and likely you would read me as female out in the world. I identify as pansexual, which is another term we'll define later, but really all of these identities inform my work, both personally and professional. It's a personal goal to continue to advocate on behalf of my community, and so it feels like a true honor always to talk about LGBTQ identities and help continue to inform folks about how to best support my community. I'm currently the Director of Development and Communications at Texas Homeless Network. I have my master's and bachelor's of social work from Texas State. I worked mainly in domestic violence, as I said, so I worked on kind of every level from the National Dating Abuse Helpline to supportive housing to TA training in Texas and North Carolina for domestic violence shelters. And in North Carolina, I work specifically with helping implement best practices for working with LGBTQ survivors in domestic violence shelters. I am very involved in advocacy, and that is probably one of my biggest passions. The other thing that I like to do to set context for today is that we don't know who is in the virtual room with us, particularly because y'all are all over Austin and you may not directly work with anyone. And even if you do, you may not know the web of folks that they interact with or who matter to them. So being mindful about the language we use and being present and open. I don't mind, especially in like Zoom fatigue world, about cameras off. If you have your camera on and you're not actually engaged, that can feel upsetting to people that are very, so say your colleague is in the room and they're going, I really hope they're paying attention to the section around transgender identities because for whatever reason, and they see you texting on your phone or whatever else, I'd much rather you turn off your camera than to not look engaged in that moment. But I will never feel offended if you turn off your camera. It's exhausting being on camera for the amount of time we are every day. I just like to make that note because yeah, Zoom fatigue in 2022 is very real. But I'm excited because the last time I did this for ACO, I think we had like 30 people because it was harder to get in person. Outside of work, the fact that all of us can show up together and be able to do this in between our meetings or working from home or wherever we are in Austin is very exciting. And I'm so glad to have so many people from so many different agencies and roles here. So I'm excited about Zoom, even if it's exhausting sometimes. Okay, the other context is really talking about why we're here. One of the main topics of research around LGBTQ youth and the experience of being unhoused. So on this slide, it shows a graph of the most common reasons that LGBTQ youth experience homelessness. And even though it's not completely known, it can range from 320,000 to 400,000 plus LGBTQ youth that experience some level of homelessness every year. The most commonly cited reason is running away from families who reject them. So that could be for emotional or physical safety when their families reject them around sexual orientation and gender identity. Also, a good note is the most likely reason that for high suicide risk is around family connections. So the more likely that a family is accepting or the family unit of whatever that youth considers family, the more likely they are to survive and thrive. The second most common reason is being forced out by their family despite preferring to stay in the home. So that is another key note. Really, it's either you're running away because you feel like you need to, or your family is physically forcing you out. Some of the other risk factors for homelessness for LGBTQ adolescents are a lot of the same risk factors that leave them oppressed into chronic preventable homelessness. These can be high risks once they become homeless or experience housing instability, which is participating in high risk survival strategies like survival sex, which can be listed under that sexual behavior category, being physically or sexually victimized on the street, getting involved in substance use because of the experience. All of these different risk factors, what that really does is create long-term housing instability and economic disenfranchisement because of their identities. LGBTQ youth who experience homelessness between the ages of 10 and 25 years old are 70% more likely than their homeless heterosexual youth to engage in survival sex. Also, between the ages of 13 and 21 years old, they're more likely than non-LGBTQ youth to experience physical or sexual victimization. So even though all of these are experiences can happen to non-LGBTQ youth, the rates are drastically higher. And so that's why we're really talking about it today. The other reason is really just ongoing discrimination in all of the ways that that intersects with homelessness or housing instability. And that can be trans discrimination of 30% of trans identified people experience homelessness at some point in their life. And most people are still currently living in poverty after they find housing, which leaves them housing unstable. 23% experienced housing discrimination due to their identity alone, and 15% were verbally, physically, or sexually assaulted at work in the past year. 13% lost a job because of their gender identity or expression. The rates for LGBTQ folks in poverty is also higher in every category of identity. This graph shows that same gender couples that identify as women have higher rates of poverty than different gender couples, while notably same gender male couples have lower rates than either. Bisexual men have the highest rates of poverty, whereas people who are straight men experience poverty at nearly half the rate. It's clear to see the benefits of being straight and cisgender, especially if you're a straight cis male, and we'll define that later. So the reasons that I bring these up is that LGBTQ folks have direct and sometimes dire consequences over an identity they can't choose. As much as you can't choose the gender you want to sleep with, marry, or love, neither can LGBTQ people. However, their identity has much greater consequences. I know that that's really heavy, but I like to set the context of why we're here working in homelessness, trying to have better language and knowledge about LGBTQ folks. We're gonna watch this, whoops. If it lets me. Oh my gosh, I'm so mad. You're getting little sneak peeks. Here we go.
In order to get on the same page about LGBT youth homelessness, let's first talk about the differences between sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. They are all different. We think of each existing on a spectrum. Being on a spectrum means that there are more than just two ways to be. There's a whole range of ways to be. Sexual orientation describes an individual's emotional and/or physical attraction to another person or people. Gender identity refers to a person's innate identification as a man, woman, neither, both, or some other gender.
We're just going to leave it at that. It's an intro. We're going to go over it anyway. Welcome to Zoom Life. You'll have access to this presentation later, but I'm not going to try to do that again. It just sums up everything we're going to talk about. So the sexual orientation's basic terminology, we're going to go over first sexual orientation and then gender identity. It's really important, and we'll talk about this over and over again. They're two separate identities. They sometimes intersect or interact, but people have their sexual orientation and then people have their gender identity, and they don't necessarily inform each other. We're not going to go over every sexual orientation term. There's a lot of them, and as queer folks have the opportunity to make more language and more of a platform to do so through technology, it's forever growing. That's also a good note as we record this and have this available later on. I have been doing this work for 10 years or more, particularly around LGBTQ identities. My undergrad thesis is over it, and I'm embarrassed by that undergrad thesis because of the amount that language changes. And so whether you identify as LGBTQ or you feel like you really know, I really want us to stay open and constantly open to these terms because they're always changing and evolving the way in which we define them. So the basic ones we're going to go over today are lesbian, gay, MSM, bisexual, queer, asexual, pansexual, omnisexual, and homophobia. So we're going to jump into them. So the first thing is understanding what sexuality is. Sexuality is where people may experience a variety of attractions to people of all genders. These are the most common sexual orientations that are listed, and sexuality can be a bunch of different things that come into how someone experiences sexual attraction or identifies their sexuality. We're going to do this one, and I'm not going to mess it up. No guarantees. That one's quieter.
Sexual orientation is one of the most fascinating aspects of our existence, and that is because sexual thoughts and attractions are experienced inside our minds. Every individual's sexual orientation is a bit different from the other, just like personalities and appearances are slightly different in each person. Different people are attracted romantically or sexually to various features and characteristics in others. Some people do not feel attraction at all and identify as asexual. A person's feelings about attraction can evolve or may stay the same over time. The same is true across cultures and countries all over the world.
When I was a small child, I remember myself falling in love with boys. Although, from time to time in my dreams, I would be fascinated by a beautiful woman or feel something from imagining a woman. Now, I never found myself attracted to a real-life woman standing in front of me, so I consider myself straight.
From a very early age, I experienced this feeling that would later become attraction towards men. For years, I was so afraid of dealing with my sexual orientation, until at the age of 21, I hooked up with a woman. And that made me realize finally that women are just not my cup of tea. So from then on, I started a process of accepting my feelings and coming out as gay to my family and friends.
I would probably define myself as pansexual. I'm more drawn to the soul and character and less to a specific gender. I had relationships with all genders, as each of them met a different emotional need of mine. And for the past 3 years, I've been living with an amazing woman who I'm still madly in love with.
As you can see, there is a wide variety of sexual orientations. Human sexual orientation is a spectrum. As we open our minds further, we learn to respect and accept the differences in each other, and realize that love and attraction may come in many forms.
So as that video gave you an overall picture of sexual orientations, we're going to get into some of those definitions. Some of the most common ones obviously are lesbian and gay, a woman who is attracted to other people who are women, gay being a person who is a man who is attracted to other people who are men. Bisexual is a person who feels emotionally and or physically attracted to more than one gender. Asexual is a person who does not have sexual attraction to others and or a desire for physical or romantic relationships, with a huge asterisk of that is a very big definition for a very rich and wonderful community of asexual people with various levels of sexual or romantic attraction. If you are in this right now and you're like, all of these are very basic definitions, asexuality is something you can always learn more about and is something that I am constantly learning about as well. And so if you are wanting to up your allyship in this moment, I would highly suggest reading more and getting to know more asexual identities. Men who have sex with men is a clinical term that refers to men who have sex with men, whether they identify as heterosexual, bisexual, or neither. It came about during HIV and AIDS as a way for men to seek care who were not wanting to or did not align with the identities of bisexual, homosexual, or anything on that spectrum. So it was a clinical term so that people could get services. It's still a commonly used term, particularly with men of color, older men of color, particularly Black men. So the thing to keep in mind with any of these terms is, one, our goal as allies or people in the community is to not use these definitions as crutches to get to know someone's nuances. People are whole and different, and all of these terms and definitions are just a starting point into getting to know people. But if a client uses any of these terms, just mirror them back, and we'll go over that next week as well. Some of the other terms that are a little bit not as common as pansexual, omnisexual, or they're very common, just not as many people know them. As I said before, I identify as pansexual. It can be used interchangeably with omnisexual, and that's just folks that feel attraction regardless of another person's gender identity or gender expression. This is kind of the differences between people that identify as bisexual, pansexual, or omnisexual. It's really someone's choice on what words they use. And again, you're just going to mirror their language. Questioning isn't usually a permanent identity, but is good to know as an identity folks hold. Queer is an umbrella term. It is very hard in these presentations to say LGBTQ over and over again for me, because I am from the generation that loves the word queer, but not everyone does. And so again, thinking about language and how important it is to mirror language. Not everyone likes the word queer for very real reasons, and part of those tie into homophobia, right? Queer was for generations a slur, and a really powerful slur at that. And so keeping in mind how homophobia impacts all of the reasons that we talked about why LGBTQ people experience higher rates of homelessness than non-LGBTQ counterparts. You have to think about all of the different ways that homophobia exists and how the impacts it has.
I never heard of this band. What kind of music do they do? Rock? So what is it, pop? So they do techno, progressive Balkan.
Sorry, I admitted someone. I'm not going to touch my computer next time.
I never. Progressive Balkan with a touch of metal? Never heard of that genre. Sexual orientation describes who you are attracted to, may fall in love with, and may have a sexual relationship with. Everyone has a sexual orientation, and there are different words to describe different sexual orientations. Many people are familiar with terms like heterosexual, gay, lesbian, and bisexual. But those aren't the only sexual orientations out there. For example, some people identify as pansexual, which means they are attracted to people of all genders. Many pansexual people feel that gender has little to do with their attractions. In other words, they are attracted to a person, not to that person's gender. Some people are asexual, sometimes called ace. Asexual people feel little or no sexual attraction to other people and have little or no interest in having sex or engaging in sexual behaviors. Many asexual people still feel romantic attraction. They feel love and affection, but may not feel sexual attraction. Demisexual people only feel sexual attraction when they have a strong romantic or emotional connection with a person. These are just some of the labels people use to describe their sexual orientation. Some people don't like to use labels at all, and that's okay too. There are many other terms out there to describe the full, diverse spectrum of human beings, and that's a beautiful thing. Until next time, don't forget to visit me at amaze.org.
I know that that one's super cheesy, but I like to bookend with other ways people talk about sexual orientations. And sometimes youth stuff is the best stuff. So I always love that one. I watch it just for fun. So we're going to move away from just identities and talk about, in context for our work, some of the barriers to care that people that are LGBTQ experience. So the first barrier to care is just the basic access to care. LGBTQ people are less likely to have health insurance, either because they've been rejected by their families when they were young, they're unemployed or experiencing homelessness, likely due to their identity, or because they require services that are not available to them when they have health insurance. We need to keep this in mind in case management, that especially around transportation or childcare, that may be overall when we're thinking about our referrals to healthcare providers, when we're thinking about referrals to competent group therapy or housing, we're actually thinking about the limited access to LGBTQ aware and informed practitioners in our communities. That is one of our duties, and we'll talk about it next week again, about how we make sure that we are not just doing equal access, but we're going above it and really thinking about how to make sure we don't traumatize or re-traumatize people. Second is just the negative experiences that are barriers to care through discrimination or prejudice from staff when they're seeking care. So bad experiences with inadequately trained professionals are a large reason why LGBTQ people do not seek care. Many people also say they look for cues when they're arriving at a facility, and we'll talk about that next week as well, for ways that they know that it's an inclusive and affirming place. This is also true for housing options or jobs that deny services. So it's not even just a negative experience of micro or macro aggressions, but literally being barred from receiving services due to their identity, which all of those tie to the lack of knowledge, which is why it's so important all of you are here and doing this, which is LGBTQ people sometimes discover at care, right, when they enter our shelters, when they enter the healthcare provider, at that time, that they don't have the knowledge or experience in caring for them. And so sometimes we feel like someone leaving our program and not feeling traumatized is the low bar that we're setting for ourselves as success. But it can be extremely traumatizing to be discriminated against, to experience microaggressions, to experience staff that doesn't actually know the right language or know the types of care people need. The other things to keep in mind when working with LGBTQ clients with sexual orientations is they have, and this goes for gender identities we'll talk about in just a minute, but LGBTQ folks have one of the highest rates of suicide of any population in our country. Trans adults serve in the US military at 2 to 3 times the rate of the general population, but die by suicide at twice the rate of their cisgender veteran peers. In a national study, 40% of trans adults reported having made a suicide attempt. 92% of these individuals reported having attempted suicide before the age of 25. Additionally, lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth are almost 5 times as likely to have attempted suicide compared to their heterosexual youth counterparts. And while these statistics are staggering, much of the suicide can be mitigated with community and acceptance. If you have not already looked for and attended a mental health first aid training, I know that Mission Capital just put out a free training today about it. It's a great way to learn about suicide prevention techniques through expert training, and I would highly encourage you to do it, especially since Mission Capital has one for free right now. It's crucial to take proper training and intervene. The other thing to note about suicide rates that I'd just like to bookend here as well is that all of these suicide rates have nothing to do with identity. It is not LGBTQ folks are mentally ill and therefore have higher rates of suicide. It is that they are so violently oppressed and experience such high rates of constant pressure to not be alive that they choose oftentimes as the only outlet is death. Another health consideration when case managing is sexual health care. So when we're thinking about how we're working with clients, particularly with people experiencing homelessness who may, in order to survive, participate in survival sex or sex work in general, or any of the ways in which people have higher risk for sexual health challenges, is to consider that those stacked depressions, right, that experiencing homelessness and being LGBTQ, bringing that into case management and bringing that into working with clients and talking about how to make sure that they're getting access to care, especially in Austin where we do have access to good LGBTQ sexual health care. The other piece is older LGBTQ individuals face additional barriers to healthcare because of isolation, diminished family supports, and reduced availability to social services. Some report discrimination from their peers when living in communal elderly housing, which leaves them vulnerable to housing instability. It's one of the highest reasons that older people leave communities is because they are closeted or forced to be closeted in their community to remain safe. And so they would much rather leave that toxic environment for a very good reason. Additionally, aging on the streets leaves many LGBTQ elders to resort to going back into the closet for survival. So when assessing a client who is older, it may be important to phrase healthcare questions in open ways that allow for them to come out to you if and when they are ready to do so. So we're going to move to gender. Does anyone have any questions around sexuality before I move to gender? We'll have time at the end too, if any pop up. And hopefully y'all are coming to next week and you'll have even more time to stew and figure out if you have any questions. So what is gender? The United States uses binary genders, meaning two gender categories of male or female. However, gender can be viewed as a spectrum beyond two genders, which we'll explore throughout this whole next section. Gender is a social concept that is used to determine one's behavior and role within a society. It varies by country, continent, state, and even city on how we define gender, what types of roles gender has, ideas, and how it changes over time. We're going to watch another lovely video. Oh, that's very weird. We're gonna work with where it's at.
What is the gender binary? Maybe you could help us clarify what the gender binary means.
Binary stems from the word bi, which is two. And so the gender binary really means two gender types, which in our culture is male and female. The gender binary for me was something I just simply couldn't tether myself to. You know, I saw gender, I see it as this circle, and I saw man and woman as just 2 points on this circle, just these binary points.
And I think what's really interesting about that visual of, you know, the way you visualize it, male and female being 2 points on a circle, is that no one is necessarily trying to say that you aren't allowed as a parent or as a person to identify and to feel like a female or a male, that those exist, but that they aren't just the only 2 options, that there has to be more options on that circle for people who don't feel exclusively like one or the other, but maybe a combination of the 2 or totally outside of the 2.
But I started doing a little research, and with that research, which was kind of the rabbit hole for me of, oh my gosh, like, there aren't just male or female genders out there. There's a whole world of gender that exists beyond just male and female.
It certainly isn't bizarre that a lot of people really believe that it is just 2 things, male and female. That's something we see every day in every magazine, on every television show, in every movie.
Shampoo and, you know,
shampoo for her.
Yeah, you know, it's everywhere. The things that we learn when we're little are our deepest grooves, and they're oftentimes the hardest things to break out of.
Yeah, and if you, as a person just learning about this stuff for the first time, feel hesitant or unsure, or it's hard for you to fully grasp at first, I think that what Lauren is saying is that, you know, you may have spent 20, 30, 40, 50 years with this understanding.
I identify outside of the gender binary, and it took me a while to open my mind that I can identify outside the gender binary rather than force myself into something. It took me a long time to learn about my own self simply because I wasn't taught. And I just didn't know it existed. And now that I do, I cannot unsee what I see.
Okay, so we're gonna go a little bit more into some of the things they touched on in the video, and the best tool that you'll find is the Gender Unicorn. This is by the Trans Student Education Resource, and that organization is all led by trans youth. And so if you are going to use one tool to talk about gender, have it be trans-led, and this is it. And this is something that you can use whether you identify as cis or not cis, and that is thinking about where we fall on a lot of these things. So first we look at gender identity, which is up here in the brain. The gender identity is where your mind believes and feels and knows that you are female, male, or other genders. And sometimes folks can fall along the spectrum of feeling maybe a little bit female, a little bit male, and a little bit outside of that. Or someone that identifies completely as non-binary may be really hard only on the other genders arrow. The same thing goes for the gender expression, which is the whole unicorn's body. That gender expression is talking about how the cultural definition of feminine and masculinity and how someone appears to the outside world and how they want to express their gender. So they're really taking their gender identity and showing it to the world. And that may vary by day, that may vary by location, of where someone is and how safe they feel to express their gender expression. Someone may dress 100% feminine, so they're all the way on that line of what the US considers feminine, right? And then someone may dress 100% masculine or do their hair or their facial features as what we would consider in the US to be masculine. Some people may change their clothes, their hairstyle, their accessories, their nails, body language, tone of voice, etc. to fit their gender identity, but it's not always the case. For example, a person may dress in feminine clothes but identify as male, or a woman may dress in masculine clothes but identify as a female. It's safe to say you can't assume someone's gender identity, so what's happening in their brain based on their clothes, I'm a perfect example of a very femme person that is non-binary. You can also have someone in your life that is a cisgender woman who likes to have her hair short and wear flannels and work boots and Levi's and identifies as a female. There is no way for that gender expression to necessarily show gender identity. And then we can talk about the sex assigned at birth, that is female, male, other, or intersex, and that can be usually you'll see it in the bottom part, but it's really whatever secondary sex characteristics that a doctor sees and immediately assigns a baby. The next is physically attracted to and emotionally attracted to. Who we are physically and emotionally attracted to exists on a spectrum that may or may not reflect who we end up in a romantic relationship with. I may be very physically attracted to men, but only date women who I am most emotionally attracted to. So I may want to form really intimate, loving relationships with women, but really enjoy sexually seeing or experiencing men. I may be physically attracted to all genders, but feel more emotionally attracted to people who are non-binary. A good example of this that I feel like resonates with a lot of different people, I'm gonna mute that, is women who are emotionally attracted to and form deep, intimate, close relationships with their friends, but are only physically attracted to men and therefore only date men. So we think about a lot of straight women who have deep emotional attraction to other women. They may not want to marry them, date them, kiss them, but they still have that emotional attraction towards other women. This is a really cool one for you to bookmark, set aside, and like think about for yourself, because we're all doing that work. One of the really big ways that we can be allies or be in the community is to reflect on our own identities, because it's not only trans people that need to think about their identities, right? Like we all have a gender, and our relationship to our gender helps us have empathy for other people's relationship with their gender. We can also talk about gender pronouns. Pronouns are what we use to identify someone or something without using their name. If you're a woman, it is likely you use she, her, hers. And that's what people use when they speak about you. So they'll say, when they're talking about you, she is talking, so I listened to her. She told me the backpack is hers. They're using your pronouns to talk about you. If you're a man, people may say, he is speaking, I listened to him, he told me the backpack is his. However, if your gender is outside the binary, like Lauren in the last video, you may use they, them, theirs pronouns. These pronouns are called gender neutral pronouns, and more people are using them, like me. Instead of using she or he, which is attached to binary gender, you use they. So when people are talking about you, they may say, they are speaking, I listened to them, they told me the backpack is theirs. Another alternative for they, them, theirs is ze, here, here, yourself, or z, or zers, yourself. Very few people at this moment in time use them, but they're important pronouns to know. And if you feel really comfortable with the first three, it's really helpful to look at incorporating and learning how to use ze, here, here's. Many people push back on the singular use of they when talking about one person because they feel it's plural. And I like to spend a little bit of time talking about that not being true. One of the examples I like to use is when a person leaves a wallet on a table and you find it and you say, I hope they come back for it. You know that only one person owns that wallet, but you're able to use they for a single person's wallet. The same way as if someone cuts you off when you're driving and you're like, they're a jerk, you know only one person is driving that car, but you're able to use a gender neutral pronoun for them. We use gender neutral pronouns a lot. And yes, singular they is older than singular you if we look back at like English language. It's also just really important to note too that trying to intellectualize our way out of humanity is not the way to go. Language is alive, so even if singular they had not been around, even if we didn't use singular they when we were talking about someone cutting us off, we are constantly inventing words and definitions and ways to interact with each other. And so it's just another way that we need to like actually show up. And if someone is using they, them, we don't need to outsmart them out of their own identity. It's also, like we were talking about with the gender unicorn, we can't assume someone's pronouns based on the way they look, i.e. like their gender expression. So the reason I bring that up, and we'll talk about it in a second, is it doesn't make their pronouns any less valid if they don't match. So say you have a client coming into shelter and is presenting in a way different than the pronouns they're using. You're again not going to try to outsmart them or like question their identity. You're going to show up exactly as they are for them. Another important language note is pronouns are never preferred. They're simply someone's pronouns. We'll see in a little bit a video that says sometimes people have preferred pronouns if they use more than one set of pronouns. So my best friend, for example, uses she, they. So non-binary people sometimes have 2 or more pronouns because they don't believe in the binary, right? If that's the case, they may have a preferred one. So sometimes I'll check in when we hang out and say, do you want me to use they, them? Do you want me to use she, her? Those are the only exceptions. And if you're not super comfy with pronouns, just assume no pronouns are preferred. If you identify as solely female and you were assigned female at birth, and I talk to you and I say he is very kind, you will be at the very least surprised and tell me that you're not a guy and do not use he. If I say back, okay, then what are your preferred pronouns? You may say, they're not preferred, I'm a woman. Do you know, like, you get where I'm going with this? Like, your pronouns, if I were to misgender you right now, are not your preferred, it is your actual identity. People don't always identify with the sex they were assigned, and there's really no option around that. Their pronouns are their pronouns no matter what. The best way to ask someone, if you need to ask them, is just to say, what are your pronouns? You'll hear people say, what are your preferred pronouns? Throw that out the window. And that is one of the ones that is just straightforward. Don't say preferred pronouns, just say, what are your pronouns? If you want to, you can say, what pronouns do you like? But really, what are your pronouns? Now you may be saying to yourself, when should I ask? Should I ask? How do I know they won't get offended? And the easy answer is there is no easy answer. When asking a client, you may say, to make sure I address you respectfully, what pronouns do you use? Or I can see on your intake form you marked as male, what pronouns should I use when addressing you? The best practice way of doing it, and kind of when I would have a phone call, is I'd say, hi, my name's Samantha, I use they, them pronouns, how can I help you? So saying my name, my pronouns, and moving straight into whatever they need from me. What will happen is if someone feels safe with you and has pronouns that you may not regularly use, they'll usually offer them back, right? So you're not asking them directly, you're doing the signaling that you're either an ally or a part of the community, and you're letting them know that they can offer them back if they want to. If they don't offer them back, so I say I'm Samantha, they, them, how can I help you? And they don't offer it back, I will usually try to default to just say their name over and over again until I hear them offer pronouns. If I feel like I really need to start using pronouns, I'll ask them that question of, in order to address you respectfully, what pronouns do you use? I think that those are all of the main points on this. Does that make sense to everyone? The other part that I'm going to go back to really quick is I did get one message, a direct message about these pronouns. The Z, here, here's, So Z, here, here's, here, self is one set. And then Z, zero, 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 self is the other. So the most common one out of all of these is Z, here, here's, here, self. The second most common one is the Z, zero, 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 self. It's also worth noting that there's even more than this. So if someone gives you another option of pronouns, learn them. So we're going to go into some of the terminology around gender identity. So there's transgender, or trans for short. That's simply defined as someone who is a different gender than the one they were assigned at birth. The opposite of transgender is cisgender, which means someone who identifies with the sex they were assigned at birth. So if you are the gender you were told since you were a baby, you're cisgender or cis. So the most useful thing to walk away with is that language, and it's in a video moving forward that kind of talks about it's not transgender as the other, and there is no other else. It's cisgender or trans. They're just two different experiences around gender, and the genders were assigned based on usually our secondary sex characteristics of a penis or a vagina. An older acronym you may see is the MTF or FTM. Some intake forms also have it. It stands for male to female, which means someone was assigned male at birth and transitioned to female. Or FTM stands for female to male, which means someone was assigned female at birth and is a male. So it essentially just denotes that transition away from the sex they were assigned at birth to the sex that they actually are. The other ones are AFAB and AMAB, which is another one, which is assigned female at birth and assigned male at birth. Usually people have really strong camps between MTF or AFAB and FTM and AMAB. AFAB and AMAB is more popular and common with younger folks right now. But again, we're going to really just pay attention to the words and identities that people share with us. It's not like we need to know this or that you would ever be like, oh, so you're MTF like that. Hopefully that is nothing you ever say directly to someone unless you, I can't really see a point where you would. The main reason it matters is for intake forms or seeing someone note it somewhere on their intake is that that's what that stands for. At this point, it's a good time to talk about the word assigned. So rather than saying someone was born male or born female, it's crucial to shift our language to assigned male or assigned female. This again reflects more clearly the experience of trans folks who do not feel that they were born male or female, but instead that they were born their true identity and assigned something that is not congruent with that identity. So no one can ask a baby what their gender identity is, so we do our best to guess. And sometimes we get it wrong. So while we guess them to be male or female based on their genitals, they may tell us later that we got it wrong. So all we have to do at that point is to acknowledge we assigned them the wrong gender and correct it based on the identity they're telling us. And that is, again, one of the things that's true for a lot of people. You're going to want to listen to your client, your friend, your loved one, or yourself around if that feels true for you. But the vast majority of the time, we're talking about sex assigned at birth rather than born male or born female. It's just a really important thing to take away. Speaking of like best practice language, the other thing that we want to think about is with transgender and cisgender, it's not transgendered with an ED at the end, and it's not cisgendered with an ED at the end. The same reason why we don't use a lot of identities and put that ed at the end, because it implies something happened to have that identity exist. One of the most historical common ones that is very helpful for people is thinking about colored people, right? That really outdated term, really violent term of like, this is like something happened to have this person. Instead of a transgender person exists. It's not their id, it's not something that happened, it's just something that is. So when we're talking about transgender people, we never say transgendered. When we're talking about cisgender, we never say cisgendered. Does that make sense to folks? You'll just see it a lot in journalist takes and stuff like that, and you're like, ooh, they don't actually know what they're talking about. so stay clear. We're going to go into one little example, and then I'm going to move on, but I like to nail this in so that folks really understand it. But so say a baby was born with an external penis. Long ago, we decided as a society that people with a penis would be labeled male. There was like no term existed. We just all of a sudden said, we're going to use this word to describe this body part being attached to this body. The doctor doesn't look at hormone levels. They don't look at chromosomes. Not that any science should matter around gender identity. The doctor delivering the baby sees a penis and declares it's a boy. The parent is overjoyed with the baby and names him Alex. The parent begins to raise Alex as a boy, enforcing strict gender roles on the kid. So he is dressed in blue, given cars, told not to cry. He's prompted to play sports. And along the way, Alex may or may not fight these behavior assignments. He may be into them at some point and then moves away from them. However, eventually Alex comes to his parents and says that he is female. Her family thankfully embraces her identity. And with the support of her parents, Alex's risk for suicide decreases by 40%. She begins to change her gender roles and what we also like to call gender norms, in changing her gender expression to fit what society closely correlates to being female. So that may be that she starts wearing pink, painting her nails, or growing her hair longer. While none of her external behaviors change her identity, she is working to be read as what she has known she always was, which is a female, by cueing to the outside world her gender identity through her gender expression. We call this social transitioning. It's important to note that no amount of transitioning makes someone's identity more valid. Alex could continue to keep her hair short or remain in boxy clothes or never wear makeup. She could choose to start hormones or get gender confirmation surgeries, or she could choose to not do any medical transitioning. Passing as female, i.e. looking what like America thinks is a female, is not the bar for someone to reach in order for us to respect them. The moment that Alex declared her identity is the moment we respect it. She could never change a thing about herself, and she is still female. And that's really important. And the reason I give that example is particularly when people are coming into services and may not have access to change their clothes. They may not have access to have makeup, or they may not have access to a barber or to change their outward appearance. And so when we have someone approach us and tell us their gender identity, trust us with that identity, we don't have to have a checklist of how we, sorry, I just read the question. We don't need to have a checklist on when we decide that they're valid. There was a question of, is there a difference between cisgender and AFAB and AMAB? Yeah, so cisgender means that someone aligns with the sex they were assigned at birth and continues to align with it. Technically, AFAB and AMAB could be used by a cisgender person, but really most of the time it's used by trans people to denote how they were assigned at birth. So technically a cisgender person could be assigned female at birth and use that term for themselves, but almost exclusively it's used within the trans community to denote kind of what they were assigned prior to any type of social or medical transition. This is also the transgender umbrella. It's another really good tool that you can have access to that just lists a lot of the different terms that can fall under the transgender umbrella. It's also worth noting that not every trans person is under this umbrella, and not everyone under this umbrella identifies as trans. So someone can be non-binary or two-spirit, genderqueer, and not use the word trans to identify themselves, though they fall under this umbrella. But it's just good to see some of the other terms we're not going to have time to talk about today as options. we're going to skip over this one for time. More gender identity terms. We talked about queer before, but it also falls under gender identity. Queer is the biggest term in current history since it's kind of the umbrella of them all. When someone is queer, they are vaguely stating they are a member of the LGBTQIA+ community. They may be straight and trans, they may be queer and cisgender. Needless to say, queer doesn't give you too much information, which is also why it's very popular. Someone is saying, generally, I'm in this community, but that's all you need to know. It's just a very powerful term because it gives that full umbrella. If a client identifies as queer, all you can assume is that they identify somewhere in the LGBTQ spectrum. If they use the word queer, use the word queer back. You don't need to push them to give you more identities than that. Genderqueer and gender fluid are both terms that describe a person who sees their gender identity as fluid. So they may sometimes experience more female identities, sometimes as male and sometimes as neither. That can include their gender expression, like what they wear, or more internal processes that the gender expression doesn't change at all. People who identify as genderqueer or gender fluid may change pronouns, kind of like what I was talking about, my best friend that uses she, they, or they may keep static pronouns that are just one pronoun throughout their whole experience, but their gender expression may change. People may identify as gender nonconforming or non-binary and usually don't identify as male or female. They do not fit, nor do they want to, into a concept of gender binary of male or female. Their gender expression may or may not align with gender they were assigned at birth. And I know that that's a confusing sentence. What that really means is, again, I'm like my ultimate tool, but my gender expression of being very feminine aligns with what I was assigned at birth, right? But my gender identity is non-binary and genderqueer. I'm both of those. But that means that my gender expression aligns with my sex assigned at birth, but my gender identity doesn't. Intersex is a term describing a person with less common combination of hormones, chromosomes, and anatomy that are used to assign sex at birth. There's a plethora of different terms for intersex folks. Parents and medical professionals usually coercively assign intersex infants sex and have in the past been medically permitted to perform surgical operations to conform the infant's genitalia to that of the assignment they want to have. The term intersex is not interchangeable or a synonym for transgender, although some intersex people do identify as transgender. The same way when we were talking about asexuality, for people that know a lot about sexual orientations, the same thing goes for intersex. It's almost always a really great place to expand your allyship or your awareness of the community if you're a part of the LGBTQ community. Intersex folks are doing really, really major things. Biden put out the first ever mandate around intersex folks this year. So the advocacy work to help make sure that intersex people have rights and that they aren't coercively permitted surgical operations as a baby is a really great way to get involved. Transphobia, while not an identity, is the same thing around homophobia. It's just important to pay attention to. Trans women of color are the most likely to be murdered solely based on their identity than any other trans person. Transphobia can be violence, both physical and verbal, and can be tangible or intangible, like hate speech. And lastly, while all of these definitions, both these and the sexual orientations, are widely accepted today on July 14th, 2022, it doesn't mean everyone in this room or in the country identifies with and agrees with these definitions. So it's absolutely crucial that when building rapport with a client or anyone in your life that is LGBTQ, that you ask them what their identity means to them. and mirror their language. If they tell you you're gay, but by or they don't tell you you're gay, that's presumptuous. if they tell you that they are gay, and by definition you know they're a lesbian, you're still using the term gay, right? You're using the language that they're offering you for that conversation and any future conversation. It's more important to mirror their identities than try to think about their definition of their identity. I don't think that this one has captions, but if you need to go to YouTube and search gender identity being female, male, transgender, or gender fluid.
Hi, I'm Jake Edwards, and I am a non-binary YouTuber and musician. Some bright lights. Why are pronouns important? Well, pronouns are a part of the language you use to address a person, and they change depending on who you're talking to, and you should always address someone with respect. Deciding not to use the correct pronouns for a trans person is a huge sign of disrespect, and will most likely lead to that person feeling deeply uncomfortable and possibly even unsafe in your company. Personal pronouns are not, as people popularly believe, just he and she. The singular use of they-them pronouns have been around since the 14th century, and was used as a gender-neutral pronoun. The use of they-them has been gradually increasing since the 1970s as singular personal pronouns, as the need for gender-neutral and inclusive language has progressed. Today, it is widely understood that gender is a spectrum, just like sexuality. We have people who sit at very fixed binary points of male and female, but many people exist in the space around those points. This is called non-binary. Many non-binary people like to use they-them pronouns as they don't implicate a binary gender and make them feel uncomfortable. It's important to remember that you can never be sure of a person's pronouns just by looking at them. Gender is a spectrum, and the way we express and present our gender to the outside world is just as vast as that spectrum. Asking a person what their pronouns are is not rude. It can be a little bit intimidating at first, but once you get into the habit, you can be confident that you won't be incorrectly assuming a person's pronouns based on how they present. This is a positive step forward, as it normalizes the behavior of not making assumptions and not linking a person's clothing to how they identify. Many people argue that they-them pronouns are plural and cannot be used as a person's singular pronouns because it's confusing. Much of the English language is confusing, and it's not uncommon to have words that have multiple meanings. Some people just don't realize how often they use they-them in a singular context already. For example, Jamie is bringing a friend over, but I don't know their name. It's used to refer to a person whose gendered pronoun has not yet been identified. So why not use they-them for one person? If someone you meet has pronouns that are they-them, you should respect that and use them, because the impact of misgendering them can take a huge toll on their mental health, and it's extremely disrespectful. Since the 14th century, pronouns outside of he, she, and they have been brought into our language. These are pronouns like a, li, si, and thon, although most of these aren't in use today. They are a part of what we call neopronouns. It can be hard to learn to conjugate these pronouns, but if you meet a person who uses them, it doesn't hurt to give it your best shot and take direction from them, or even look it up for yourself. It takes a small amount of effort on your behalf, but it will most likely mean the world to a person who uses neopronouns. I feel like my eye is twitching. The landscape of our language is always changing and adapting to suit our needs, just as more labels for sexuality have come around over the years. Gender identities have gone through the same thing. Non-binary is an umbrella term that encompasses many labels. Gender fluid is someone who considers their gender to be fluid rather than fixed on one point. Bigender is someone who identifies as two genders, which could be male, female, or a number of other things. Agender is someone who doesn't have a gender at all, and so on. These identities are vast and unique to each person, and no one really feels their gender in the same way. For many non-binary people, using he or she can make them uncomfortable, but lots of people use multiple pronouns. I personally identify as non-binary, and my pronouns are he or they, and that's because I feel a connection to masculinity, but I often feel very fluid and unconstrained by masculine ideas. The term preferred pronouns only comes into play when a person uses multiple pronouns but has a preference. This preference can change day to day as their gender fluctuates. My preferred pronouns are they. but only because they're not the only pronouns that honor me. A trans person does not have preferred pronouns if they only take one set of pronouns. Saying that someone with one set of pronouns has preferred pronouns implies that they have multiple, and in doing so you risk thinking it's okay to misgender them. So using the correct pronouns is not optional. It's okay to ask, respect how labels and language are evolving, and always be open to learning new things.
Shoot.
We all have to start somewhere.
Someone just messaged me, that's why it messed up a little bit. If you could re-message without the asterisks of what you're trying to say, that would be helpful. Okay. So the next thing we're gonna do is do a little bit of assumptions. So we're going to take a moment and think about what we imagine this person's name, sexual orientation, gender identity, and pronouns to be. So just think for a moment, look at this picture and think about if you were to, based on assumptions alone, make up who you think this person is. We're going to give it like 3 seconds. Okay, so now that we've done this, we're gonna assume that everyone knew this was a little bit of a trick question. So this is someone named Rain Dove. They're a genderqueer model who plays with gender in their art. Rain uses they, them pronouns, and their sexual orientation is queer. This is some of their work. And so it's really fun, not fun, it's very interesting to think about all of these assumptions we're making on a daily basis, and why it's important to ask pronouns, why it's important to stay open to someone's sexual or gender identity, because we can make a lot of assumptions based on how Rain dresses from day to day. We're going to do that with this person. We're going to think about what we would say this person's name, sexual orientation, gender identity, and pronouns. I love people brave enough to type it into the chat. When we're in person, I always have people pair up and do it together, and then it gets super uncomfy and fun. Oh, I love someone that said father. Like, what a, yeah, that's another identity we can talk about too. Oh, I love this. I know it's brave to be like, this is my assumptions of this human being. So this person is Aiden Dowling. He uses he, him, his pronouns. He is attracted to females and has a wife and a son, and is a trans man. Oh my gosh, I love that you said Carl. He is also a very big trans advocate. So if you're on social media, he's a great person to follow, and he can continue to teach people a lot. We do a lot more when we're in person together, but these are some other people. Derek. These are some other people in the celebrity spotlight that are trans or within the LGBTQ community. On the top left is the infamous Laverne Cox, which I feel like most of us know from Orange is the New Black, who is a trans woman. On the top right is Janet Mox, who is a trans woman activist and author. Both of them actually have really good books if you're interested in reading. In the middle right here is Jazz Jennings, who is a trans woman famous for her show I Am Jazz on TLC. On the bottom left is Nico and their partner, Bethany Meyer. Both of them use they, them pronouns. In the middle bottom is Elliot Fletcher from the show Shameless and The Fosters. He is a trans man who uses he, him pronouns. And lastly is Liv Hewson, most recently known from Netflix's Santa Clarita Diet, that's one of my favorite shows. If Unfortunately, it got canceled, but solid show if you're looking for something to laugh at. They use they, them, theirs pronouns. The important thing to know about any of these celebrities is you can't tell their gender identity from looking at them, and that is neither a good nor a bad thing. A common word to describe someone who is perceived to be cisgender is passing. Passing means that a person is not read as transgender and is often, unfortunately, used as a measure to how attractive or valid someone is. A trans woman who is passing is someone who looks like she was assigned female at birth, but this often takes extensive amounts of resources, such as access to gender confirmation surgeries that add up to hundreds of thousands of dollars in the American healthcare system. Many of these celebrities pass due to thousands of dollars and access to disposable income that folks who identify as trans women in your community do not have access to. This makes them no better or no more valid than celebrities who are trans women. These examples are also not meant to have you study and examine cases of people who are trans or along the LGBTQ spectrum so that you can spot them better. The point is to highlight that there is no one look for being genderqueer, non-binary, or trans. People may have different gender expressions, gender identities, and different desires and definitions of what it means to transition. There is no one way to look trans, non-binary, or anyone else in the LGBTQ community. Yeah, and for the insurance question, very rarely does it pay for it. And there's usually a lot of different steps that you'd have to take in order for insurance to cover it. And sometimes even to get procedures, which particularly with our clients, say a surgeon, even if insurance takes it, even if the person can afford it and afford to take off time off work, a lot of times they'll need 2 years of psychotherapy in order for the surgeon to say yes. So that means they've been paying likely out of pocket for 2 years for a therapist or a psychotherapist to confirm what they already know to be true. There's a whole bunch of barriers and reasons why people, even if they want to medically transition, don't have access to medically transition. This is going to be our last video. It's my favorite video. So I hope y'all enjoy it too.
Say it one more time. None, five, none, three. Sorry. 3, 2, 1.
When we think of the word gender, a whole lot of image.
Gosh dang it. I'm so sorry, y'all. I try to respond to the chats and I shouldn't.
Say it one more time.
And a whole lot of images rush to mind.
Most of us are taught the idea
that people are born a boy or a girl.
And we're expected to act a certain way based on what's between our legs. But that actually isn't true for everyone.
It totally ignores the huge and amazing world of people who are trans and gender diverse.
And that's what we're going to dive into in this series.
Being trans, gender identity, and what it's all about.
Welcome to Trans 101. Traditionally, we tend to think of gender as decided by the body we're born in.
People are usually assigned female or male at birth.
But bodies and gender are actually pretty separate things.
Gender is basically part of someone's internal sense of self.
It can be male, female, neither, a mix of both, or exist totally outside of that.
A person's relationship with their gender can also change over time as well.
The gender we're assigned at birth usually gets reinforced by the people around us over our lives.
Hearing things like, be a man, or you're such a girl.
You can feel like we're being told who we're supposed to be.
Most people feel comfortable with the gender that they're assigned.
But for some people, that label never quite fits and doesn't feel right.
That's what's called being
transgender. You've probably heard the term transgender, or even gender diverse.
That's when your gender doesn't entirely match the one you're assigned at birth.
A lot of people use trans for short.
That can mean the gender you were assigned felt meaningless, restrictive, or altogether just didn't quite fit.
That might seem like a pretty broad definition, and that's because it is.
And the most important thing you need to know, there's no one right way to be trans.
There are a lot of different ways people might identify.
It's not about knowing every single one.
But rather being open to difference when you encounter it.
And also keep in mind that gender and sexuality are largely separate things.
Lesbian, bisexual, asexual, gay, and straight are a few different examples.
But we're all those things in addition to being trans.
They're not the reason we're trans.
I think for me, there's kind of been this expectation that I transitioned because I like guys and wanted to get with them more easily. Actually, I'm a super gay lesbian.
When we talk about gender identity, people often think of two opposing groups.
A binary of female and male. And that when you're trans, you go from one to the other. But there's a lot more to it than that.
Putting it simply, non-binary is an umbrella term people use
To describe gender that doesn't fit squarely into male or female.
And this can include people who feel that their gender is a mix of both.
Changes often.
Or is something totally separate.
Or have no strong sense of gender at all.
Different people might use more specific terms to describe their gender, whilst others use non-binary.
And trans people who aren't non-binary,
Who identify as strictly male or female.
might describe themselves as binary.
There's also a term for people who aren't trans. That's cisgender.
Cisgender is a way of saying not trans.
You might also have heard it's shown as cis.
Being cisgender is when the gender you identify as totally matches the one you were assigned at birth.
The term comes from Latin, meaning on the same side as.
and is used in contrast with trans, which means on the other side of.
It might be a new word to get used to, but it helps avoid a contrast of trans people and normal people.
And instead, just recognize that being trans or cis are just different ways to be.
So if you're cisgender, this is a great word to add to your vocabulary.
Transitioning is when someone takes steps
to socially or physically feel more aligned with their gender identity.
First is social transitioning.
Social transitioning involves how we interact with people.
Such as coming out as transgender.
To ask people to use different words and pronouns to describe us.
Or changing the way we interact with gendered spaces, like the bathroom we use.
Physically transitioning often involves a person altering their appearance.
To what feels right for them.
Like clothes, makeup and hair.
Or seeking medical support.
which can involve hormones or surgery. Transitioning isn't about appealing to other people.
Or necessarily trying to look like a cisgender person.
It's about a trans person doing what feels right for them.
And what that means for each person is different.
It's also important to know that transitioning isn't instant.
There's a tendency to think of transitioning as something automatic, like there's a fairy godmother who will pop up and magically change everything. Transitioning is a gradual thing.
And everyone's different.
No two people transition the same way.
A trans person's identity isn't defined by the way they do or do not transition.
So if someone doesn't feel transitioning is for them, that's totally cool too.
Gender dysphoria is an intense discomfort a trans person may feel
about physical attributes or the way that they're gendered by others.
Gender dysphoria could be on a social level, a physical level, or even a purely emotional level.
Dysphoria can be really overwhelming sometimes.
Having to live with a body or expression you're not comfortable with can really impact the way you're living.
Trans people find different ways to alleviate dysphoria.
And the positive impact that could have is enormous.
Like transitioning, having dysphoria doesn't make someone more or less trans.
And is not something all trans people experience.
There will be a lot of new words.
We often hear things like, that's grammatically incorrect.
Is that a real word?
Fine, you got us.
You couldn't get any store-bought brand name words.
So we have to go with garden grown, that twice as nutritious.
In reality, all language evolves at a community level.
Every single word.
For trans people, we're developing language that describes who we are.
Because in the past, either a lot of the words haven't existed,
or those that have been created by people outside the trans community.
And don't always reflect our experiences.
When you're talking about gender and bodies, talk about what you actually mean.
People will have uteruses instead of women when talking about bodies.
Because some trans guys and non-binary people have those too. Or if you're talking about being a woman, avoid things like people with vaginas and just say woman, because not all women have those.
There's also never a need to say he/she when talking about a group of people.
they will do just fine.
It's shorter, less clunky, and more inclusive.
Using the right language makes trans people feel included, and it's actually more accurate as well.
Learning this stuff so you can be more informed is a pretty awesome thing to do.
So if you found this video helpful,
share it online so it can reach even more people.
And if you want to know more, check out the rest of Trans 101.
Full of even more awesome videos about gender diversity.
So I know that there was a conversation in the chat about if it is Texas specific. It is definitely not. And Emily did a good job of talking about some of the reasons that's the case for transitioning. We're going to try to rush through these last few slides and we can go over them more. I hope that everyone will come next week. And so next week we'll be talking about equal access specifically. And we'll talk about a lot of the ways that we use this information to inform our services. Coming out usually means that a person is revealing their gender or sexual orientation. For some Native American communities, people declare coming in as presenting oneself and being fully present with their identity. Coming out isn't a one-time thing, it's a lifetime process. The reason we talk about it is the fact that outing someone isn't an option. We'll talk about that next week. But outing usually means that a person is revealing a person's gender or sexual orientation identity to another individual or a group. No matter your relationship with a person, it's never okay to reveal their sexual orientation or gender identity. Even if you're their parent, their ex-lover, their best friend, or caseworker, there's never a reason to reveal their identity without their consent, and outing a person without their explicit and specific consent is never okay. For all of the reasons that we talk about the emotional and physical safety of people and thinking about what identities we reveal that could put them in danger. A lot of the same barriers to care happens within trans communities, that happens, or gender identity communities, usually trans, that happens in sexual orientations as well, of limited access, particularly like we were talking about with insurance. Of trans-related costs are often not covered by insurance, and they may not be able to use insurance on things like basically hormones, right? Like the lowest barrier care that's still very expensive and hard to access. Because it usually also requires a counselor or a physician to be able to dictate that you are valid enough to get hormones. Specialist gender confirmation surgeries, all of those things to keep in mind when we're doing case management and understanding the lack of options for trans folks. Second is the discrimination they may experience in healthcare options. Insurance coverage overall, and then legal protections. The Supreme Court has never ruled on transgender rights, and thus transgender rights in the United States vary considerably by jurisdiction. So in some states, people that are trans may be able to have legal name changes. Other ones will have a considerable financial and or no opportunity to legally change their name or their gender marker, which is again why it's important and required by HUD to not ask someone for legal documentation when they are seeking services. There's so many different reasons why someone's legal documents don't match their identity. All of the same health considerations, just more specifically focused on gender identity. The same things I've said before, which is not everyone aligns with the same definitions I've provided in this presentation. So it's important to ask folks what definitions mean to them and if it's relevant to your case management or your relationship with that person. The most important thing is to not walk away and feel like you need to memorize all of these terms. What's important is to mirror language and show up for folks that are offering you trust in their identity and telling you things, and also understand the diversity and fluidity of expression within ourselves and our communities. So we have 2 minutes. And I'm happy to stay after as well for any questions or answers. And then also I can do my best to ensure that we have more time next week, which we usually do. Equal access is a little bit different, but we'll come together next week for equal access that will go over specifically how to comply with the HUD mandate for equal access, but then also go beyond it with our services. I also have my email there, and then we'll go into questions and folks can pop out as they want to. But I appreciate y'all, and I'm very, very thankful that you chose to spend your afternoon with me.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and link the feedback form that we have. So if you have a quick second, just to give some feedback on what additional trainings that we can offer, and we'll stay on for a couple of extra minutes just so if there's any additional questions as well. But thank you guys for joining, and please stay cool because it is hot outside.
I'm dropping the things for, it looks like they have one for youth, which is the first one I posted, and the second one's for adult. And I don't know if that is the age range or and that's for the mental health first aid training.
Thank you.
Of course. I got it in their newsletter, so I bet it's on their website too.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Something I didn't understand. So cisgender is when you are born and identify with the gender